What is going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, back with another Outriders WorldSlayer video to bring to you, and today we're going to be looking at the explosives expert when it comes to this game. That's right, we're looking at the RPG and Scrapnel Technomancer build that's currently in the game. Now, most of the time you don't really want to run these two together, but to be fair, you kind of want to settle on, do you want to go for an RPG build, or do you want to actually go for a Scrapnel build? Now, technically you can get away with using both at the exact same time, which obviously the footage in the background is what's going to show that off, and I'm also going to show you why that's kind of important when it comes to the pack trees as well, because I do think this has a nice little bit of synergy that goes quite well with this, but I don't think that the current set bonus, which is going to be the torrential downpour, is actually going to be the main way to be able to go for this. I do think that Borealis is probably going to get a massive increase for this, and you're probably going to want to use something like Cold Snap as something like that as a third skill rather than something like Pain Launcher. But before we get into any of that, make sure you have dropped a like and a subscribe. It really does help the channel out, and let's get right into it. Alright, so first and foremost, we like to look into the build, and the build I've gone for, it kind of takes along what the anomaly power, like stupid increase that we're actually going to see potentially with this, with the pack trees actually dropping for Technomancers when we actually use things like Skill Leech. We have gone for that mode, the node that actually doubles our Skill Leech when we reach a certain threshold in terms of health, and we've gone for increasing our maximum damage as physically possible in terms of increasing our anomaly power as much as possible, grabbing as many cooldown reductions as we can, increasing our armor every single time we use one of our main skills, and also increasing the amount of damage that we're able to do. This does actually eventually leave us with 1 point left over, which I have put in so we actually get a little bit, a tiny amount of health to be able to keep us a little bit tanky, because while minigun is obviously exceptional at staying alive, and obviously just having so much skill leech that you're never actually going to worry about going below a certain threshold, the RPG and Scrapnel build actually has a small window where that actually does become a problem. So therefore, actually having a little bit of help and a little bit of health and a little bit more armor definitely comes in handy. Now, the gear that you're seeing on the screen right now, and when it comes to the outpost thing, is what I'm currently rocking when it comes to this actual build, and that, obviously you can tell there is a 4-piece when it comes to the torrential downpours. Now, I would recommend swapping out the gloves for something else that has anomaly power and cooldown reduction, and maybe obviously status power depending on how we're going to go with our pack trees, because when it comes to this, just having that max health, just having the cooldown reduction, we don't benefit from having a 4th piece going on, and I do think that anomaly echo is probably one of the least of our concerns when it comes to it, so I do think maybe actually looking out for a purple and being able to replace that probably would be the best way to be able to actually go with this. So the 3 main pieces when it comes to the torrential downpour that I would recommend would be the headgear, the chest piece, and the legs. So when it comes to it, we have increased our rocket capacity as much as possible. We've also increased our rocket damage as well. We've gone for as many mods into our Scrapnel to be able to increase the damage, but also increase how many Scrapnels we can actually chuck out at one time. We've also got our power assimilation to be able to increase our anomaly power by a decent amount every single time a new elite appears on the battlefield. We've got Captain Hunter to be able to actually start bursting down all those nasty elites when they actually do enter the battlefield as well, and Unstoppable Force is there to be able to just give us a nice anomaly power boost on top of what we already have, based on our resistance piercing. Now, we don't have anything that actually intrinsically allows us to be able to increase our resistance piercing while we're fighting, so we're just relying on the couple of nodes that we actually do get from the skill tree. But every single time we actually upgrade our anomaly power, that also means that the cluster bombs that we're getting from the torrential downpour set is also boosting up from that as well. So therefore, we're actually inflicting more damage than basically the more anomaly power that we have as standard, so therefore I do think Unstoppable Force is a really nice way to be able to actually get a nice bit of percentage back into that, and it allows us to be able to maximize the true potential that when the Scrapnels actually come down. In terms of pairing with the weapons, we actually have our standard stuff when it comes to anomaly power builds, which will be our Funeral Pyre with Shadow Comet and Claymore Torrent, and we've also got our Anamoir with our Moaning Winds and our Radiation Splash to be able to complement it as well. When it comes to the skills, we have gone for Scrapnel and Tools of Destruction, but we've also gone for Pain Launcher just to be able to maximize the true ordnance when it comes to this actual build, because more explosions is better, but like I said, when it actually comes to what WorldSlayer is actually going to offer for us, depending on how we go with our pack trees, we might not actually stay with the Pain Launcher, we may not even stay with the Torrential Downpour set, and we may start gravitating towards another set altogether. But let's get into it. So obviously you've seen the build in action, you've seen all the gameplay that's in the background. Let's start making our way through the packs points. So with the packs trees, it's a little bit on the difficult side, because when it comes to the actual RPG side of things, when it comes to tools of destruction, even though we actually do benefit from one of the nodes more than the actual minigun, because we do have an interrupt on the rocket launcher compared to the minigun actually having anything like that, we do have our own separate tree. But to be completely honest with you, I don't think that tree is very good, and it definitely doesn't help to be able to maximize your DPS output or anything like that. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to start strategizing and theorizing, and I want to know in the comment section down below how you would actually handle this part of as well. Let me know if you actually agree with what I'm about to suggest. So what we can do is we can go for, if we're just purely going for DPS and we're just looking to be able to maximize our true damage potential, I do think that top tree is probably going to be the best way to be able to go for this. The reason why is because we can go for initial striker, where activating our skills increases our anomaly power by 15% for 5 seconds, depending on which of them is higher. Now the main thing I want to be able to find out from this is because using Scrapnel allows us to be able to have up to 6 cluster bombs available to us in one single cooldown. Does that mean that we're able to stack this in terms of initial striker, or is it just purely that we're able to refresh it every single time? If it is the case that we are able to stack this, that means potentially every single time we check out Scrapnel, we're consistently increasing our anomaly power further and further and further until we actually get to the 5th, to be able to get to the 6th one, my apologies, in which case we'll actually have a 90% damage boost or anomaly power boost when it gets to that point. Granted, by the time that time it will be very short-lived, because obviously the 5 seconds on the first skill would be very short, but this is something that requires some testing. I'm going to assume that they've already thought about this, in which case it probably won't stack. Either way, 15% is still going to be a nice boost, which obviously goes into our main skills, and it also goes into our cluster bombs as well on top of that. Now, in terms of the next 2 points that we can go into, so obviously we've got Brain Dead and we've got Lethal Devices. Well, Brain Dead is not going to offer us anything in this, because activating a decay or gadget skill increases your weapon damage, and we're not using any of the skills that's on there, so we're not benefiting from weapon damage, and we're not using any of the skills to be able to trigger it. So the only one that we can go for is Lethal Devices, where your ordnance and gadget skills inflict toxic to enemies hit and deal an additional 10% of anomaly power as damage if toxic was refreshed. Now, the reason why this is going to be really nice, and this is going to be one of your main DPS kind of increases when it comes to this actual build, is the reason why that when we use any kind of like splash damage weapon, we're going to be inflicting toxic to all those enemies. Now, on top of that, we're going to be able to use things like Euthanizer to be able to increase, like, add multipliers onto our actual damage every single time that we repeat a hit onto an enemy that's just been hit by toxic. On top of that, because we are an anomaly power build, every single time we hit an enemy and we refresh that toxic, we're going to be dealing 10% as separate damage on top of our current damage output anyway, just from actually just refreshing and just from firing our skill. So we're seeing an additional 10%. It's not going to work out exactly like 10% of our current damage that we're outputting, because obviously this goes purely based on our anomaly power, but let's say theoretically we're up to let's say 150k. Let's say, well, that's what we've managed to get. So we're going to be doing 15k as damage output on top of our current skills damage, so therefore we're just going to see a tiny little bump when it comes to it. But the other thing to be able to keep in mind with this, and this is something that I've been talking about with Deuce over on the official Outriders Discord, is the fact that because we are inflicting toxic, we don't have to be able to rely on things like Quartermaster or the Grim Inventor set anymore to be able to refresh our RPG stock, because when we inflict toxic, we can use things like toxic lead to be able to actually get our ammo back, and that means 40% of our weapon mag will actually be coming its way back. Now, we do know that this will work, because when it comes to the minigun, the original way before we had like Quartermaster get its buff all the way down to 1 second cooldown was to be able to use toxic lead and then use our melee when it changed with freeze and toxic, or using blighted turret to be able to inflict toxic. We were able to get 40% of our weapon mag back through the minigun through those kind of means. So therefore, I'm pretty confident, I mean, it might be difficult, but I'm pretty confident that in saying this, like 99%, that we will actually be able to refresh our mags through that kind of means, which means that unlimited rocket launches are going to be even easier than ever to be able to obviously keep up. The next node, which is Painkiller, where damaging an enemy grants you 5% health regen for 3 seconds and stacks up to 2 times. I think it's just going to be a really nice kind of like kind of a way to be able to keep ourselves alive, because at times, like I said, there is like a few seconds where you actually you have some like skill cooldowns, and it does mean that you kind of need something to be able to keep yourself alive, to be able to keep yourself healthy. So therefore, having Painkiller is actually going to be a really good way to be able to obviously offer some more support for this build, and you're actually going to be able to stay a little bit more fresh, a little bit more healthy, a little bit more tanky in the fight at the exact same time. Now, when it comes to the next few kind of trees to be able to go through, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to suggest really going for one of the capstones. Now, the reason why I'm going to suggest this is because depending on the actual armor set that we are planning to use, if we actually do go for a 5-piece into a different kind of gear, let's say theoretically we actually do go for some Borealis sets here to be able to obviously benefit from freeze. Just bear with me on with this a second, and we actually take out Pain Launcher and we swap that for something like Cold Snap or maybe even Cryo Turrets. We can actually benefit obviously from that cryo damage. We can actually benefit from the toxic damage, and on top of that we are able to then benefit from the status power that the set actually does offer us and on top of that we can also go for another 2 pieces that are purples to be able to give us anomaly power, some status power, and some cooldown reduction. The reason why this is important is because depleted core, where your ordnance skills damage is increased by 100% of your skills power, means that potentially we have the chance to have 5 pieces that offer us 30%. Obviously this can increase even further potentially if we actually do grab some armor and it goes all the way up to 75, so this could potentially get nutty. Is 150% of our just of our status power gets thrown straight back into this, which means that our skills damage is increased by 100% of that, so our skills damage is going to benefit from 150% additional damage right there. So this is going to be like probably one of the main ways to be able to actually go into your actual skills. So if you are using RPG, this is 100% the best way to be able to go. So make sure you grab depleted core if you actually do test out some kind of like kit like that. If we actually go for the capstone of that though, which is Burrowing Charge, where critical shots inject an enemy with an explosive charge for 5 seconds, dealing 100% of anomaly powers damage upon the next critical shot taken. Unfortunately, because it's an RPG and because we actually have already tested the tools of destruction in previous kind of iterations, you aren't able to ever achieve a critical shot with the rocket launcher, or no, definitely not to the extent that you're actually able to benefit from actually using Burrowing Charge to be able to benefit. So therefore, we're not going to actually, it'll just be a dead pax point to be able to put straight in here, so therefore I'm going to recommend that you actually stay clear of this one. The middle tree is all about sniper weapons, so we don't want to touch that whatsoever. So the only other place that we can really go would be the top tree. So we can have permanence where inflicting toxic on an enemy was a 100% chance to inflict a random additional status. Obviously we are inflicting toxic from the previous one with lethal devices, so therefore you could potentially go this way and you potentially could like start inflicting like a massive amount of statuses all around the battlefield just from having all these splash explosions just pretty much setting off everywhere. So that one probably would be a lot of fun to be able to mess about with, but obviously the other way you could actually benefit from that is obviously going for Dissection instead, where you deal 10% more damage to enemies for every single status inflicted from them. The fact that we're only dealing 10% for every single status that is being inflicted, rather than the potential for 150% additional skill damage based on status power, doesn't tempt me in the slightest. So therefore I do think depleted core is going to be the best way, but what I'm also going to suggest now is actually going into the bottom tree. So the bottom tree does give us the Undying, where every 10% of our missing health increases our weapon leech and our skill leech by 10%. So I do think that if you are actually going for those 4 points, and obviously you're going for depleted core, I do think your last one potentially would be best to go into the Undying instead, so that way you are actually able to keep yourself boosted up in terms of like the amount of health that you're actually able to leech from obviously being able to just play the build as standard. You can also go for Override, where your anomaly power is increased by 50% of your skill leech. So this is an alternative if you don't want to go for top tree, which I do think is the best way to be able to go. You can go this way instead, where you can go for Override, where your anomaly power is increased by 50% of your skill leech, and obviously, you know, we have gone for as much skill leech as possible when it comes to the class tree, and on top of that, we've also gone for the previous node with Undying to be able to increase the amount of skill leech that we actually get. Just as soon as we start dying, obviously the more powerful we actually become. You then got Apothecary, where you pulse for every 5 seconds, healing all players within a 20-meter radius for 5% of all damage done by you between each pulse, which is very nice. Obviously, it's definitely better in a co-op kind of scenario, but obviously it is a decent skill to be able to go for. The top tree is all about turrets, so we definitely do not want that. The middle tree is all about critical shots and overhealing, where you're obviously not going to really benefit from that. So that just leaves the bottom tree, where we've got Hastened Influence, reduce the remaining cooldown of one of your skills by 1 second for every status removed by you or applied to an enemy by any kind of player. The current setup with this, we're not applying any kind of status as it is, because obviously we've ignored the top tree, so therefore we're not benefiting from being able to inflict toxic, so therefore we aren't actually doing anything for this to be able to help us out, which is a massive shame, because I do think this would be a missed opportunity, because to be able to have Scrapnels back consistently, to be able to just basically run around being Bomberman would be absolutely hilarious to me. So I wish there was a way that we could actually get this to be able to work. Maybe there is, maybe I'm just I haven't thought too far ahead into that. And then lastly, which which is the one that's specific to Tools of Destruction RPG and Pain Launcher and Scrapnel, which is your interrupt skills now remove effect resistance from hit elite, and this has a 10-second cooldown. So we are able to take things like absorbing skin off and all that kind of thing to be able to obviously deal even more damage through and obviously make it a little bit easier for our co-op mates. I don't think this is the best way to be able to go for. I just don't think that offers enough in terms of the 5 packs points, especially when we can obviously go top tree to be able to get a massive damage increase. So I do think that's going to be the better way to be able to go. And last but not least, obviously we do need to cover the Ascension levels to be able to give you an idea as to what to actually gravitate towards. Now, obviously, because this is an anomaly power build, obviously the standard stuff does apply. So going for your anomaly power to go for your resistance pierce, all that kind of good stuff, obviously would be actually very beneficial. But obviously your first 10 points in terms of like what's the first category that you should actually go towards, I'm going to suggest to you it's a toss-up between resistance piercing and cooldown reduction. Now, cooldown reduction does mean that you are able to get your Scrapnels back a lot quicker. If you actually do go for a Borealis set at some point, then obviously you can get your Cold Snap back quicker to be able to inflict that wide amount of freeze. And on top of that, I just think that Resistance Pierce is definitely going to be the better one to be able to go for instead of Anomaly Power, because this allows you to be able to go through your enemy's defenses even more to be able to deal more damage. And on top of that, because we are using Unstoppable Force like we do tend to use, that means we are actually getting a benefit to our Anomaly Power on top of that. And obviously the more Anomaly Power we have, the stronger our Scrapnel kind of sets or cluster bombs are actually going to be able to do. So while I do think that cooldown reduction and your resistance pierce are going to be your main ones to be able to go for, I do think there is actually another one, and I think this is kind of specific to this build, and that's the fact that we can go for status power. Now obviously getting 10 points into status power is going to increase our skills damage even more if we do actually go for that top tree when it comes to packs points. So if you do actually go for that, make sure to keep that in mind, because that should offer you an even bigger boost for when you actually deal damage. It may even be more beneficial to actually go for that first, but obviously because you are able to reset this as many times as you want to be able to free of charge, and obviously as often and as little as you want, therefore you can actually mess about with this and test it out yourself when this actually does drop. So there you have it. That pretty much wraps up everything to do with the RPG and the Scrapnel builds that's going to be dropping with WorldSlayer. And this is kind of the build theory, and this is the way I kind of want to project this to actually go. But let me know in the comment section down below, what would you change? Is there anything else that you've thought of that you might actually think this is a better way to be able to go with this build? And I'm very interested and very intrigued. And obviously the whole purpose of this series is to be able to make sure that we all have the correct information going forward. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of this video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does mean the world to us. Let me know in the comment section down below, and obviously just say hi. But that just seems to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.